the biggest thing about building a story about your idea that someone will tell themselves is that I say there's two things that are really important to anchor it on. And one is, how can you anchor your idea in something that somebody already wants? Of the two things, that's probably the easier one. I call that the goal in the book, but this is the audience goal. What is something that they're already looking for that your answer provides? And this is not something that you know deep down they're looking for. This is not a thing that you wish they were looking for. This is something that they're literally looking for right now. It's an urgent issue, the kind of thing that they are being tasked to solve by their boss, or that they are, they're searching on their own on Google because it's, it's just, it's an urgent issue, or it's a persistent irritant. It's something that day in, day out, it's just this thing that they always have to work around. It's a pain in the butt, but what else can they do? That's the kind of thing that you want to, the more that your idea can be anchored in something that somebody already wants, the more that they're going to be automatically curious about it, the more that it's already going to be relevant to them, the more that you can start to say and make sure, so just from a kind of idea validation standpoint, that your idea actually solves an important and urgent or persistent problem in the world, which is something I saw a lot with the absence of, and looking at TEDx applications where I'm like, this is a lovely idea, but I'm not sure what it does in the world.
Yeah.
The second thing is, and this is by far much harder.
Hello, welcome everyone to yet another episode of It's On with Manpreet Bawa, and I am so excited to bring this guest today because not because of only her background, but because what she brings to the table. She's an author. She's part strategist, message strategist. She is part keynote speaker. She has helped organizations like Johnson & Johnson, Harvard Medical School, Intel in their messaging strategies. She's also worked as executive producer for TEDx. So any of you wanting to know how do you get into TEDx and how to make a, keynote that goes well on TEDx, she's the person you want to talk. So welcome, Tamsen, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Manpreet. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Amazing. So let's start with where everybody today is, the COVID. How are things with COVID and everything that's going on in the world, which is for the first time, everybody is in the same boat, kind of.
Yeah. It's been an interesting time. I joke that it feels like we're in 2020 part 3, but oftentimes the third movie in a trilogy is the best. So let's hope, we're good. It's been very interesting because I live in Boston, Massachusetts, on the eastern coast of the US. And we were one of the places that, where we got it early here and got hit pretty hard. Like one of the first super spreader events before we knew that it was a super spreader event was at a Biogen conference here in downtown Boston. And that's been both good and bad because it means that combined with, we have enormous numbers of hospitals and colleges here meant that we closed down and shut down really early and have been tracking with the science pretty much from the get-go. But that means that our experience here up in the Northeast has been very different than some from other areas in the US. And so there have been times where it feels like, in addition to all sorts of other reasons, we're just absolutely living in a different plane of reality than, for instance, some of my friends who live in Florida or in Texas, where the reactions and sensibilities around it have just been very, very different. So it's been interesting to see. I'm most fascinated by just looking at how differently different groups of people have experienced and interpreted and reacted to all of this. And I try to remain curious about all of that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And in your area of work, being, keynote speaking, and do you see a shift that hasn't happened in the last maybe 5-10 years? Do you see any shift coming in that industry?
I don't mostly because there just isn't. I mean, from the speaking standpoint, obviously everything just kind of shut down. At least I chose to shut everything down because I had kids that weren't vaccinated at home. They now are, but it was, I didn't want to be the reason why my family got sick.
Yes.
So I made a decision very early in 2020 to pivot away from the speaking aspect of things and focus much, much more on writing. So, got the book finished, on consulting and coaching, which is the lion's share of my work anyway, and what I really enjoy. I can say what I wish would happen as far as the kinds of messages that people are putting out there in the world. There are the ones that you would expect. I think there's a lot of people who are doing well with messages about resilience right now, and that are dealing with. I heard a good friend of mine, Mitch Joel, talk about how he was seeing a trend towards how to activate curiosity in people. And if I were to add another topic to the list of what I hope people will start to become more interested in, is in a response to all the increasing polarization and tribalism that's happening kind of everywhere, from what I can see, not just here in the U.S., but
everywhere,
in Canada and the U.K. and Eastern Europe and in European Union in general, actually, that I would love to see a rise in genuine seeking to understand how other people see the world and getting a better understanding of that, not from a us versus them standpoint, but from a, listen, we got to live in this place together. So, how can we find middle ground? I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that I would love to see more.
Yeah. And that's so true, that polarization is, I think it was there, but COVID has just propelled it. It's just brought it to the center stage that you cannot ignore it anymore.
That's true. There was a time early in my career, very early in my career, where I was kind of the bottom rung and I was a management consultant. And it was interesting because the company at the time hadn't, it was great. I was making like a ridiculous amount of money, as management consultants do sometimes. But the problem was that the company had added this consulting arm without really having any clients for the consulting arm. And so we had this phalanx of consultants with nothing to do. And I think it was one of my earliest exposures to the fact that in the absence of something to do, people will find something to do. And a lot of times in the absence of something to do, people will find something to be outraged about. And so, in this example, like for us, it was people got really worked up about like what time people were arriving in the office. And it was like, but that person's arriving at this time, and I just remember one of the more experienced consultants just sitting with me and maybe one or two others of us over lunch. He was like, you know what? If we were busy, this wouldn't be an issue. And so I think you're totally right, Manpreet, that is that in the absence of, so it's not just, COVID shutting things down and those kinds of things. I think it's an intersection of the fact that we've had this cessation of normal activity, cessation of interaction with people in all but the most kind of difficult ways, right? To interact in a way that has dimensionality. We're interacting with people asynchronously on social sites and where we can be kind of hiding behind screens. We're not actually seeing people face to face. That's intersecting with, I think there's been a general degradation generally about us having, as humans, shared experiences, shared things as entertainment and all these other things have become more and more fragmented. You take these two things and you put them together where people already weren't really interacting much, and then you make them bored. They're going to find things to get outraged about. And it's not that those things aren't outrageous, particularly here in the US. I think the upheavals of 2020 around the killing of multiple Black men and women in the hands of police custody and others, that stuff is outrageous.
Yes.
But I think there's other things that have, what's sad to me is that I don't see that level of passion around those big issues right now here in the US. I see that level of outrage around stuff that's just not as important. And so that's kind of the thing that I try to hold curiosity for those things rather than judgment, because judgment only leads to more outrage and more polarization. And I'd love to be able to model the things that I wish more people did, which is like, I wonder why they are acting that way, or I wonder why they believe that, or I wonder how this perspective makes sense to them. Not, oh my gosh, they must be X in order to think, behave, or act that, or believe that way. But, that's different than what I see and how I think or believe or act. I wonder what makes them that way. And I think that the more that you can ask that of yourself and other people, even why am I acting this way in a particular moment? I think you have, to me, it's a path towards finding that shared experience, because it doesn't take much of doing that before you start to realize that people are very much driven by fundamentally the same things. It doesn't mean that we're all going to agree about things, but we're driven by fundamentally the same things. And when we can start to see the world through other people's eyes, I think it starts to sharpen the edges. I think it starts to soften the edges with which we interact with them. And I think that that's only good, because I think we've all gotten a little sharp and brittle.
Yeah, we have. And I think that's what COVID showed. Like, you cannot hide anymore. Everybody was just, sort of putting it down. Maybe it's not important at work. I think I'm seeing the same thing with the great resignation now. People are leaving jobs. Yep. And I've been a consultant all my life, and I've been in both sides, with working for the customer and working as a person who's managing the customer. So and I see it, this thing about when you are curious, when you're open to entertain that somebody else may have a different idea or opinion to something, it just opens the doors very differently. So thank you for sharing that.
Because I think fundamentally we all humans, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be validated, we want to feel like we have some worth, and it can be difficult, but the path to getting someone to do that for you is to extend it to them first, right? Like that's the way to that's the way it happens. Like you say, no, you must listen to me, but it's like, well, if I do that, I don't have, I think the human nature is such that I don't know that you're going to respond to that. But, work of Robert Cialdini, for instance, beautiful stuff on the, idea of reciprocity. But if I extend to you first, this genuine curiosity, this genuine seeking to understand kind of piece, then generally, not always, but generally that's going to activate in other people you just listened to me, you heard me, you gave me my space, you saw me. All right, I'll do the same thing for you. And it's just, I think there's this perpetual tension that I see just to all the work that I've done. And this has been true for years in the work that I've done around communications and change communications and brand strategy and message strategy, is that I think ultimately you're faced with a choice. Do you want to speak, or do you want to actually be heard? And I think there are people, for various reasons, where just getting it out for them is what they need. I definitely put myself in somebody who was like, well, I don't want to speak for speaking's sake, even if it's writing or whatever. Like if I'm going to put something out there, for me, it's because I actually wanted to be heard. So what can I do to help make sure that what I've, that it's not just hitting their eardrums, right? But actual communication happens, because the communication is not about the sending out of something only. It's about the receiving of that information. And I just feel like myself included, we can do a lot more to make sure that what we send is actually received. And
yes,
I think those would be important steps for all of us to take.
yeah, you touched on a very beautiful point that can go into multiple dimensions, especially the communication and sending and receiving. Like, it's important that your message that is sent is received well, and you are open to receive what is being sent to you. But also, when you said that word receive, it just took me to a little bit on the spiritual side of the things. Like, so many times, because we're closed in whatever we're doing, we're not even receiving what God is trying to send. Whatever universe is, you might call it universe, God, faith, whatever it is. But I just thought that was such a beautiful thing to come out of the discussion of this.
I think it circles back to the conversation about COVID and all of this. And one of the things that, I don't know. I love what you're saying about that, Manpreet, that sometimes that we're closed off to whatever could be coming our way. And what that made me think of was the work of Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning. And what struck me so powerfully about Frankl's work is that, particularly in this age where there's a lot of people saying, like, find your passion, find your purpose, as if there's one. I don't believe there's just one. And I know that could probably be mistaken when I say, like, find your red thread. But to me, that's a different thing. For me, that your red thread is your operating system. It is why you do what you do the way that you do it. And that is what ties together all the things that you have purpose for and passion about. But I think that, what Frankl said that really stuck with me is that, I think a lot of times we can get trapped in saying, what does this mean? What is this? What does all this mean? Even if we're even that curious about it.
Yes.
And there's a slight shift that he talks about that I find so powerful, which is, I'm not going to assume that there's a plan or a purpose to what out there, but I can always choose what meaning I will draw from it. Like, take that ownership from it and say, I'm in this situation. What is the meaning that I can draw from this? Because really, that's the only thing I can control. I don't know if there's a purpose and a plan. I'm not the kind of person who's wired to just leave it up to somebody else and abdicate that responsibility for my own behavior. But I love this idea of, what meaning can I draw from this? And for me, this whole situation with COVID and all the things that have been happening from a political standpoint with, here in the US and around the world, I think it's a time for, that's a time for self-directed curiosity, right? So a way to solve polarization is to be curious about other people, but to be able to find our own path when we're bored and the life seems like we're just on rerun over and over again is to self-direct and ask those questions to ourselves. Well, what meaning can I draw? What lessons can I learn? What can I do in this situation so that this adds more meaning to me and for me and who I want to be and how I want to move about the world?
And I think since you brought Viktor Frankl, we can, his quote that, the between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. I think that just beautifully sums it up.
Absolutely. Yay, Viktor Frankl.
Yes. I wonder sometimes how, when I look at people like Viktor Frankl, who could have that depth in so little to be spoken. And I think it's beautifully intersects with our talk, where importance of message, your ideas, and, finding your red thread, which you touched upon. So how about you just briefly give a little bit about your journey, and then we get into what is red thread, why is it important, and how people can go about that.
So I've lived, I feel like I've lived most of my life straddling worlds, and oftentimes opposite ones. Anywhere from when I was in high school, I was both in the arts community and, managed the varsity boys baseball team. And then, when I went to college, I was in the business, I took got a business degree, and I got a degree in liberal arts and American studies and art history. Same thing. I did the same thing. So there's always this time where I've been in nonprofits and studying for-profits at the same time. That's what I did in grad school. And then even when I was in organizations, my job was to bridge the gap. So even that, my brief but enduring turn as a change management consultant, we were doing mergers and acquisitions. So it was about how do you bridge the gap between two organizations and two cultures. And when I worked in organizations, I was often in the role that had to, because I was often in marketing communications roles, I was often in the role that had to bridge between an organization's audience and the organization itself. Like, how do we get the organization strategy out to the audience, and how do we make sure that the audience, the customers, the clients, the students, depending on where I was working, that their voice was heard back. And I've just been endlessly fascinated by how to make, what, being a US based person, what I refer to as English to English translation work better. How is it that we can improve how we understand each other? Oftentimes, when I was doing message and brand strategy, which I still do, so that, the power of a brand or an organization could come across. And then about 9 years ago now, I got involved in the TEDx organization here at TEDx Cambridge in Massachusetts. And that really started to hone further my real interest in, okay, it's not just about, an organization. I really fell in love with how do I help these experts get these amazing world-changing ideas? How do we bridge that gap? Because how do we bridge the gap between academia and everyday? How do we bridge the gap between, expertise and implementation? How do we bridge the gap between an idea, which is what TED is all about, and actually making it work? Like, how do you operationalize an idea? So the work of, that I've been doing for the last, 8-10 years, more specifically around ideas, has really been about trying to answer that question. How is it possible? What's the method by which we can make our ideas irresistible to people, to the people for whom they would have the most impact? And so the book is a product of that. It's a product of all that, that 25 years in branded message strategy, those, 8-9 years in TEDx, and 13 years moonlighting as a weight loss coach as well. That's a whole other story. But those three things, those three lines together really just intersected with, what, there actually is a way to do this. There is a way to decode how we come up with idea and process an idea and make a decision to change. And that's what I wanted to figure out. I wanted to figure out how could I do that? How could I help other people move their ideas forward by improving how it is that they talk about them?
Yeah. And that's where this book, excellent book, comes in. And I'll put that in a link if anybody wants to learn more without investing a lot or without investing into or committing to the, more broader areas that Tamsen works in. If you just want to feel what it feels like finding and working with your ideas, I think this book is great. It's very simple. That's the first thing I realized when I picked up the book. The hardest thing was to just put it down, like flip the pages, and I had to work. I thought that, like other books I will read, I'll get the keynotes, but this one, if you really want to get things out, you have to work, like you have to play with that idea. And for first couple 4 or 5 days, I was just having hard time sticking to one idea. It's like, oh, I can work on this, I can work on so. Yeah. But it's a great book. It has all the tools that you need. So getting into the red thread, what is the red thread?
So the simplest definition I can give of a red thread is it is a story that you tell yourself to explain why the world or you works the way that it does. We all do this. We all, oftentimes unconsciously, we all build these rationalizations, these justifications for ourselves about why, that person is behaving that way, why we're behaving this way, why what we did was right, why what they did was wrong. So you see how this ties into our earlier conversation. And what I discovered, my hypothesis was that these stories that we build ourselves and tell ourselves follow the same structure as the stories that we tell other people. So my hypothesis was, well, what if we found the elements of that story that we told ourselves about an idea? Would that help us articulate the idea to other people? And I can tell you now, after testing it for 8 years, yeah, it does actually.
Yes.
My fondest wish is to somehow partner with somebody in academia to actually test this, so that it's more than just kind of ethnographic research at this point. But that's what I discovered, and that's what I was able to prove out, which is that there are these elements of story, like once upon a time stories, that when you can identify those elements in your own idea, in your own messages, in your own content, a couple things happen, and it's pretty exciting. One is you understand your idea better.
Yes.
Our brains take shortcuts around our ideas. We kind of assume, because they are our ideas, we don't actually sometimes listen to all the steps of the story. We just say, well, this is the right answer, and we kind of forget the path that we got there. The second thing is, because those elements follow a structure of story, when you find them for your idea, you're able to very easily explain it to somebody else in language and in elements that their brains understand and instinctively. So that what happens is that you're able to transfer your idea from your brain into somebody else's with just the minimum amount of loss of meaning, a loss of understanding. And this is the big thing about the book, you're building not just the story you tell about your idea, but the story your audience will tell themselves about the idea. The third thing about doing this is that it really does a lot of what we were talking about before. It really forces you to look at your own ideas from the eyes of somebody who isn't yet convinced that it's the right one. And so it makes your idea stronger because you have to put it through the eyes of a skeptic. And we don't usually look at our ideas with our own ideas with skeptics' eyes, but we sure as heck look at everybody else's that way. So this is just flipping that script around a little bit and really building it up from there.
Yes. And one of the things that I think this book does nicely is that it's not labeled for just one person. Like, anybody can do it. People in sales, everybody is doing something, right? They are selling their ideas. IT people, technicians going in interviews, going in the project presentations. Everybody is selling some idea, but not everybody understands the structure behind the idea or the skeleton of that idea, which this book really nicely does.
Thank you.
In your book, when I read, there were different components of that idea. And I don't want you to share all the components, but give one or two components that, people can know about.
I think I think picking up on this idea of looking at your idea through skeptical eyes, right? So somebody who isn't already convinced that it's the right answer. The biggest thing about building a story about your idea that someone will tell themselves is that I say there's two things that are really important to anchor it on. And one is, how can you anchor your idea in something that somebody already wants? Of the two things, that's probably the easier one. I call that the goal in the book, but this is the audience goal. What is something that they're already looking for that your answer provides? And this is not something that deep down they're looking for. This is not a thing that you wish they were looking for. This is something that they're literally looking for right now. It's an urgent issue, the kind of thing that they are being tasked to solve by their boss, or that they are, they're searching on their own on Google because it's, it's an urgent issue, or it's a persistent irritant. It's something that day in, day out, it's just this thing that they always have to work around. It's a pain in the butt, but what else can they do? That's the kind of thing that you want to, the more that your idea can be anchored in something that somebody already wants, the more that they're going to be automatically curious about it, the more that it's already going to be relevant to them, the more that you can start to say and make sure so just from a kind of idea validation standpoint, that your idea actually solves an important and urgent or persistent problem in the world, which is something I saw a lot with the absence of, and looking at TEDx applications where I'm like, this is a lovely idea, but I'm not sure what it does in the world.
Yeah.
The second thing is, and this is by far much harder, but it's critical, is how does your idea align with something that your audience already believes to be true about the world? And this piece is super important because that's how you get someone to convince themselves that this is the right idea, because your idea is mimicking something else that they know to be true someplace else. So the example I use throughout the book is the De Beers diamond tagline, "A diamond is forever." Because when that tagline was first introduced in 1947, people believed that it was true, not as a diamond ring is forever, but this is why the tagline is so powerful. It's a diamond is forever. And most people would say to themselves, well, it's true. You know, I believe that. And if I'm looking for, you know, if the thing that I want, right, align with something somebody already wants, as well as what they already believe, if I want the best symbol of my commitment to somebody else, and I believe that a diamond is forever, it becomes really hard for me to stick with whatever my approach was before if it didn't already include a diamond. So I'd say, you know, of those, you know, those pieces, you know, there's a third in there that's important as well. But I think to be consistent with what we've been talking about, Manpreet, the more that you can figure out how your idea, again, anchors with something that somebody already wants and anchors with something they already believe, the stronger your idea is going to be and the more successful your message around it is going to be.
Yeah, that diamond story, that diamond example is, again, an idea that everybody understands, knows, and is able to relate. And, you know, I've forgotten the parts of the books, but the minute you said diamonds, it just, everything came back. And that's the beauty of that red thread there. It's just keeping that thing together. You mentioned TEDx, and you know, it's a stage that a lot of people, especially in the research and even now in marketing, and people who are coming with new businesses want to be on. And in your experience with you know, more than 3,000 presentations that you have worked with, or the messages that you've worked with, and probably a lot more that didn't go through also, what has been common thing about the ones that really stick and the ones where didn't do well, even after getting the TEDx stage, they didn't sort of got the similar response from the audience? And
well, first clarification, the 3,000 presentations that I have done are kind of my own personal, like across all of the years. I would say from a TEDx standpoint, you know, I've had a direct hand in probably about 60 of them with TEDx Cambridge at this point. And then with my own clients, I'd probably add another 20 or 30 or 40 or more. So probably close to 100.
Hundreds.
So what sticks and what doesn't? So 7 of the talks that I've worked on with TEDx Cambridge and with others have been promoted to TED.com. And that's a pretty high number, ratio of the, you know, out of 67 of them have gone forward to TED.com. So I think that there's the ones that really stick with people. I mean, TED is a black box, I have to tell you. So some of the things that, you know, I think sometimes talks resonate with people because it's the right message at the right time. It's the thing that people are thinking about. It's a thing that sometimes they tie into persistent topics of human nature. But the trick, I think, and it's one I talk about in the book as well, is that the idea at the core of the talk combines something people want, which we've already talked about, with some via a means they don't expect, right? It gives them something that they want via a means they don't expect. So for instance, didn't work on this talk, but Amy Cuddy's Power Pose talk combines something people want via means they don't expect. And if I were to say that, her talk combines how you can use body language, that's the unexpected part, to overcome imposter syndrome. That's the thing that people want. So if you're somebody who suffers from imposter syndrome or just wants to feel more confident, maybe you don't fully suffer from imposter syndrome, the idea that your body language could be a path to doing that was unexpected. It wasn't something that people had heard before. And I think that the most, even if we talk about, kind of the epically famous ones, like, how schools kill creativity. That's again, like something people want. I want to do the best thing for my child. What's the best, unexpected thing? Oh my gosh, this thing that I'm doing that I think is good for my child may actually be doing something really awful to them. So I think that I think it's always something like that. And that's why I think it's getting increasingly hard to find and to generate really good TED and TEDx ideas, because it's not that there's a shortage of ideas in the world, not at all.
Yeah.
It's that in a way, TEDx, which if people aren't aware of the difference between TED and TEDx is kind of like a franchise of TED. It's they have to sign on and go through training and subscribe to and get a license from TED. But essentially within certain boundaries, they can do what they want with, choosing the speakers and, all of those kinds of things. There's just so many of them now that unless you are somebody who is actually in the business of creating knowledge, not just synthesizing knowledge, not just applying it, unless you're in the business of actually creating knowledge, which, for us at TEDx Cambridge is essentially academics in a large way, not exclusively, but close. It's really hard to actually say that you've got something genuinely new and unexpected out there in the world. But those are the ones that, it's that intersection. I mean, I think one of my personal favorites of the last, 5 years is Suzanne Simard's talk on how trees talk to each other. And, it's one of those things where, if I were to put my own process on it, it's like, how does her idea, which she's proven out, she's created this knowledge in the world that trees talk to each other through a substrate of essentially mushroom connections. That's oversimplifying it. How does it get something that people want? It ties into, for those people who are interested in, like, how do we preserve, right, the natural world that's important to us? If you're interested in that, then all of a sudden she's indicating, like, she's brought in this new piece of information that trees talk to each other through the fungal layer that's underneath them. It's like, oh, holy cow, we have not looked at that, like, at all. We haven't even thought about that. What does that mean? And so I think as I'm talking through it, I think there's this third piece that really takes something over the top. I think a great idea can give something people they want via means they don't expect. But you know what I think the best TED and TEDx talks do is they make people feel a little bit smarter about something. They just give them this like, oh, I've got this thing that I can go tell other people about. And that's how Jonah Berger's work on Contagious, and how ideas spread. I think that's a real piece of it, is that the social currency that can come from an idea. When you get to say to someone, hey, did you know trees talk to each other? Did you know, to use one of our examples from TEDx Cambridge, D. Roy, did you know that we can restore the pathways to memories in early stage Alzheimer's mice? Like, did you know that we can do that? Because that kind of, did you know, not in a condescending, like, oh, I know a thing that you don't, but in this helpful, like, there might be an answer, like, that we didn't know about before. I think that's where there's this magical combination. I would say even Jill Bolte-Taylor's talk on My Stroke of Insight is that too, right? Like, her talk is all about answering, why is it that, certain people are, the way she frames it is, why does she process the world in one way, and her brother, who's schizophrenic, process the world in another way.
Mm.
And her answer is that for, after she's gone through this experience of a stroke, that it's the people who can kind of tap into both sides of the brains kind of consciously or not that are the ones that are able to do that. Well, that's a cuckoo bananas like idea. If you think about it from the get-go, you're like, what? I would wait. And that's part of the reason why her talk is so brilliant, because by the end of it, you're like, yes. Absolutely. Yeah. But this kind of, I know, for instance, that like her talk is what, in my mind, it links up with all the kind of more recent conversations about psychedelics and like Michael Pollan's new book. And, just this, I think people are starting to appreciate this. Oh, there's a layer of something that we haven't seen before. And I think that's a very long answer. But I think that that's really what makes something really good, is not just that you've got a new take on something, but you're creating, like, I just come back to that phrase. It comes from my friend, and I don't know if she realizes it, mentor Ruth Gautier, who talks about like, that's a creation of knowledge. And I think that's when you create knowledge, that's, you're able to do all of those things. You're able to answer a question that people want. You're able to find a way that people don't expect. And because you're creating knowledge and sharing it, you are helping people to feel just a little bit smarter about themselves or the world. And I think most people want to feel that.
Yes, and that is beautiful. And I only know the last talk you mentioned, Jilte Boyles. That's the one I've seen. And I think one of the beauty of that is it brought people from different worlds also together, like not only the academia, not only the science, but also people who are a little bit more on the spiritual side of the things.
Yep.
It just intersects those thoughts. So that was one of the beautiful.
It's such a I also appreciate that talk from a construction standpoint, because it is, it's a very technical talk. If you go back and look, read it or listen to it, like she uses a lot of technical stuff in it. But I love how she slowly moves from a question that people are willing to ask. Like why is it that she and her brother experienced the world differently, to this answer that is just, if she started there, people wouldn't have gone with her. So the structure of that talk, I think, that's another thing that plays into it, is kind of understanding the baseline level of readiness of an audience to hear an idea in a certain way. And there's lots of examples of different ways that different speakers do this. But I think she knew consciously or intuitively that she couldn't come right out with the answer. That, hey, we are just absolutely not tapping into both sides of our brain. There's a whole other world out there, an experience out there in this other brain, that A, is possible for us to tap into, and B, we'd all be a lot better off if we could. I mean, I think if she started there, people are like, no way.
Yeah.
But just the evolution that she takes over that talk is just, it's masterful.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing out those talks. I'll make sure put in the notes so people who are curious can go and listen to these talks. These are beautiful talks. And when you mentioned, having a component in your talk or message that makes you feel smarter or asks you, hey, did you know that? I remember just a couple of days ago, my son is almost 5. He turns 5 in March, and I was picking up from the school, and he goes, Dad, did you know who created this world? And I was like, who? It's like God. And he had that lesson in the school, and I was like, okay. It was just amazing to have that interaction and that curiosity that, and I could see in the eyes that he learned something new at that day in the school, and he was just so curious to share it for.
Yeah. I love that. I think, and kids are such a beautiful window into that, what your son brings to mind is the fact that I think all of us, and you really see it in kids, are trying to make sense of what we see all the time. And yes, stories are the way that we do that. But when you get a new piece of information like that, I think the reason why it's so powerful is that all of a sudden, like, you may not even realize there was a piece missing in the story, but all of a sudden when your son heard that, for him, it's just like something clicked in, and something was like, oh, this thing, like, oh, now there's a character in the story of this world that I see that now helps me make it make a little bit more sense. And I think these pieces of information that I think people who are very talented at creating information, creating knowledge and putting it out in the world are doing exactly that. You're adding a piece of information that helps things make a little bit more sense. Either, why something happens the way it does, or, just, oh, now what do I do next? Like okay, I maybe I have a belief about, an understanding about why the world works the way that it does. But, why is that? How do I put that into play? And I think that's, I don't think we can ever lose sight of that, because that's really like, I say this to my clients often, but an idea exists in between, right? Like, that's how I think about it. Like, you can, back to the sending and receiving, you can send an idea out there, but it's how it's received that really makes the difference.
Yes.
And that goes beyond just communications and thinking about, like, your audience's point of view. It really comes in and says, to me, testing, like, I test all my ideas and the ideas that I'm looking at on behalf of other people from that initial standpoint of utility. Like, does it help somebody else? Is it going to help somebody else? And not every idea has to do that. Those are the people I choose to work with, are people who serve ideas bigger than themselves, who ideas do serve those bigger purposes, just because I like those ideas. They're more engaging to me. But I think that's, again, I just, it's a mantra that I've often held for myself, which, is be useful, be thoughtful, be passionate, be kind. It's not an accident that useful is the first one and kind is the last one. But those, I think I think that summarizes a lot about why I do what I do and the kinds of ideas that I think are most effective, because I just think people, goes back to being, heard and seen and validated. Like, people want to feel and be seen as smart, capable, and good. And so when you give them something that makes them feel more of those, more smart, more capable, more good, you're really validating their humanness, their humanity, their personhood. And back to what we were talking about at the top of the call, that is a great place to start anything, is with having validated someone's personhood. That oftentimes will open up many, many paths to change, to paths forward. And just what I see with my work, it's not hard. It's not hard to validate someone's personhood. It really isn't. But you have to be willing to do it. And that's, I think, probably, that's probably my most, where my curiosity takes me next, is what happens when someone's no longer willing? Like, why does that happen? Why does it happen that someone's not willing to extend that grace to somebody else? I don't know. I want to know.
Those are really, really deep topics, and it's deep, but it's also simple. It makes me curious, like, how did we lose that fact? Like, in the name of professionalism, we lost part of our humanism there, because we were just trying to be too professional about whatever we were doing. And thank you for bringing that message. It just makes me curious, but it also makes me more respectful of what you do and what you stand for. And I'm so glad you were doing this now.
None of that's in the book, by the way. Well, but that comes back to what we're talking about as well. I mean, most people aren't walking around being like, how can I validate people's personhood? So it's like, you don't start there. You start with, we're back to what people already want. People who have big ideas want them to have the power that they think their ideas deserve to have. And a lot of people struggle with that. And, it's just one of those things, like, fundamentally that we are seeking from other people what we need to extend to them first, which is, if we want somebody to validate our ideas, we have to validate them first. We have to validate the ideas they already have, so that they can be open to hearing and doing something different.
Amazing. I think for anybody who has ideas, looking to get on TEDx or thinking about it, I think they need to go back 10 minutes and listen it again. And there's a lot of gold in the last 10 minutes about how to shape an idea into a message that sticks out. So moving from messaging and ideas into branding, because that's what it does for brands. And one of the things I've always seen, the strong brands is all about that ideas. It's just the messaging is really strong. It connects all the pieces that you've talked about. But what I'm seeing now, and you could say how you see from your end of the things, is that a lot of people branding used to be for the companies. I think we have come into the place where it's for individuals. People are realizing the importance of having their LinkedIn as their voice, not their company's voice, as what they're doing. And how do you see when it comes to branding for individual? Why is it important? Why one should be doing it now?
Well, okay. So I have a slightly different perspective on branding, because I think a lot of times what brands and branding, particularly when personal branding comes into play, it ends up being aspirational and meaning how I wish that you would see me. And what ends up happening is, because we're trying to create, I don't think it's intentionally a false front. I think sometimes it is, though, but we're trying to say, well, here are the pieces of the, I want you to think this about me, so this is what I'm going to put out there. A couple things happen. One is there's an inherent lack of integrity there, right? Because it's not, it's a put on thing. I saw someone call it performative authenticity the other day, and I think that's a beautiful thing. Like, you're performing like you're like how you want to be seen, but you're not actually. That's not actually it, but it actually is, right? It's very meta. But the fact that you would perform in that way, to be seen in that way, actually says a lot more about you than just being that way. Which brings me back to the red thread and what I mentioned earlier about, yes, it's a story that we tell ourselves, but when it becomes an internalized story, it becomes, as I described it earlier, really our operating system. Is that we build and fulfill the same pattern of stories over and over again. We answer the same questions. We tend to frame things as battles between the same kinds of things that were anchored in certain sets of beliefs. And so what happens is then we really do have something that oftentimes is unconscious to us that guides why we do what we do the way that we do it. And it's those stories that we're constantly telling ourselves. So when you kind of create a brand, when you try to consciously create a brand, you create this disconnect of integrity and actual authenticity. It's really effortful. Like, you have to work at that all the time. And then which is hard and means that you're not doing as good of a job on something else, because there's a limited amount of work that we can put in the world. And the third thing is that it also means that you're probably exercising muscles that aren't actually as strong as the ones that guide what you do, guide what you do the way that you do it all the time. In other words, there's a reason why for most of us, the strongest set of muscles in our bodies is our legs. Why? Because we stand and walk for most of us, right? And so for those of us who stand and walk, that's our strongest set of muscles. But that means that even if we're not walking, we can do really strong things with our legs, even though that may not be where we built up those muscles. But if we decide to go rock climbing someday, right, then we're going to discover that it's a lot more efficient to push with our legs than to pull with our arms. Why? Because those muscles are already built. So I think what happens with personal branding is oftentimes we choose how we want to be seen, and then we work backwards. And I think that it's a lot easier, more sustainable, more differentiating, and ultimately it has more integrity to start with why you do what you do the way that you do it, and package that and just make that, because it's just a lot easier. And I'm saying that as someone who I know people regularly said, oh, Tamsen, you have a very strong personal brand. I'm like, no, I don't. I just don't do stuff that isn't consistent with who I am and what I like. period. And by having figured that out, it just makes a lot of it a lot easier. So yeah, I have giant polka dots on my wall because I love giant polka dots, right? And yeah, it tends to be consistent with the other stuff that I do because I like patterns like that. Like it's just, people don't need to spend so much time worrying about personal branding. Just have integrity to who you are and what you do and what you care about, which means you need to stop and figure out who you are, what you do, and what you care about. But I have found increasingly that that finding your red thread, and it's, it's a slightly different adaptation than the way I wrote about it in the book. But by finding that, like, what am I trying to do? What questions am I trying to answer? What gaps am I trying to close in the world? What do I believe? What are the sets of skills that I've developed as a result? You start to have incredible clarity about not only what you do, but why it's important, how you do it is different than anybody else, and how all of that has power and value that you can use to your and the world's advantage. So start there.
This is beautiful. I've never heard somebody talk about brand in this way. Like I've heard people talk, be authentic, but you can get lost in that. What is authentic? And what you said was so deep in a way that go figure out who you are before trying to build that brand. Because if you don't even know who you are, then you're doing the other way.
You're building your brand all the time, whether you are doing it consciously or not. Like the way I think of a brand is the sum total of people's experiences with you. So if you don't know what you're doing, like that is your brand. Your brand is going to be this kind of mishmash of like somebody who's representing themselves this way in the market, but acting like this. Well, that's not an awesome brand. So like I said, and the gap is really hard to maintain. So like, again, maybe I'm just inherently lazy, but just who are you? Like, what do you do? Like start there. So there is value in that. I believe that to my core, that who you are, what you do, why you do it is already strong. There is already value. There is already differentiation. And what would it mean for you who's trying to figure out your personal brand if you just started with that as the assumption, that you already had it, that it was already strong? What does that look like? What is that strong brand that you have already created? Because you have. So start there, because then you don't have as much work to do.
Yes.
Lazy.
It is simple, easy, but also easy to get lost. Like people.
Yeah, it is.
Because people are not taught to, know who we are.
And so I like to be, maybe I'm a lone voice in the wilderness to the other sense, just saying like, you know what, most of the people who are trying to do something else probably have something to sell you. It's not that everybody's got to do their thing. And sometimes you need that outside set of eyes to help to understand.
Yes.
But the minute you start to feel like I need to do this in order to be seen this way, that's when you've already stepped out beyond yourself, and not in a good way, right? You don't need to do anything different. You just need to capture what it is that you already do differently.
Amazing. So if I was an engineer, right, I'm just starting putting my LinkedIn, I'm just trying to pick an example, and I want to, show via means of LinkedIn what I do. What I used to do earlier, and still a lot of my experience would show, is like just title, who I work for, a little bit of just a few lines of their descriptions. And what you're saying is that, add how are you doing, like show your work in that area, just not leave.
Yeah. There was a while where I was doing a feature as part of my newsletter and part of my YouTube channel, where I was calling what's missing from this message. And someone asked me to take a look at their LinkedIn bio. And I think that probably summarizes really well my thoughts on that, how to do that. But yeah, I do think, that if somebody asks you what you do, it's important to give people a bucket so they understand kind of roughly how to start to think about you. But then the more that you can hone that into something where somebody goes, oh, I want that, I need that. That's important. Like that's how I eventually landed on English to English translator, because most people get it. Like they just get it instinctively. They're like, okay, whatever their context they bring to it, if that's something that they need, then they know immediately they need it. They're like, so, and because not everybody understands like message strategy or something like that, or, idea strategy, like whatever. But most people understand like English to English or language to language translation. They're going to get that.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I will look around and put that link to your talk that you mentioned. So if anybody is curious to see how to do it, they can watch your YouTube.
Super.
Good. So when Tamsen is not working, making ideas, click for message strategies, what do you do for fun? What ideas create fun for you?
Okay. So most recent, like on a top of mind, my husband and I, we just adopted a retired racing greyhound.
Oh, wow.
Learning the world of greyhounds and being a dog mom. That has in no way supplanted my affection for my actual children, who are a ton of fun. But kind of the fun stuff. I'm a big fan of crossword puzzles. I do the New York Times crossword puzzle every day. I'm a big fan of mystery novels, so I like reading those. I kind of move through like big sets. So I read all of the Sherlock Holmes novels, and then I read all of the Agatha Christie novels, and then I've read all of the Rex Stout Nero Wolfe novels, and then I read all the James Bond novels. And,
Amazing.
So yeah, I think those are some of the things. And occasionally when it's not affected by pandemics as it currently is, ballroom dancing.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this. How can people find you and your work? I will put in the show notes, but what is preferably for
TamsenWebster.com. I'm as far as I know, literally the only Tamsen Webster in the universe, so not too hard to find. So yeah, TamsenWebster.com. I love it if people sign up for my newsletter, TamsenWebster.com/newsletter. Every week putting out something that I hope is useful to folks, that help them make their messages or their content just a little bit stronger so they can get their big ideas out there in the world.
Amazing. Thank you. I will put that in the show notes. Again, thank you so much for this time. I know it was a ton of value. Somebody who's moved from the engineering into this space with podcasting, and I still am learning, and I got a lot of value, not only just from your professional side of things, but also learning your humanness and how connected and strongly you believe in the ideas of humanity. It was wonderful. It was a gift for me to learn that, there are people still like you that, even in your spaces, you're talking and bringing about that. So thank you so much, Tamsen, for that.
My pleasure, Manpreet. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did and got some valuable nuggets out of it. If you liked it, there are other shows you can watch. They're exactly what you need. And I ask you to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you thought of the show. Really, I want to hear from you firsthand, what you felt, what you liked, what you didn't like. So thank you, and see you around.